Chosen Season 4 was amazing. Of course, we've done all of our deep dives, but there's always more stuff to gain, especially from the Bible roundtables. Of course, we have the rabbi, pastor, and priest who all come together with Dallas and talk about their differences and maybe things they disagree on or agree on, or how these things are actually put together. Why does the rabbi allow Dallas to put stuff in the Chosen that's not actually accurate? Or why does the priest allow Dallas to put things that are strictly Protestant within the show? I think there's definitely some things there that there's some wiggle room, but overall it's really interesting to see these conversations. In this portion of the roundtable, we're going to be talking about Herod and Herodias. We're going to be talking about their connections as the rulers of this land and how they thought about John the Baptist, Jesus, and the apostles, and everything kind of going into that. So let's jump into this section here and talk about the Herods.
Shortcut to this particular episode.
Right,
So.
and client king, we mentioned that, tetrarch, you said on behalf of Rome. I mean, that's got to still get your blood boiling, and because no doubt there were many Jews, particularly a zealot, who would have wanted Herod dead, and John the Baptist confronting him would have been not just for the fact that he's in this incestuous relationship, but he's problematic to begin with.
Yeah, I mean, in the daily Jewish prayers, there's a prayer called the Amidah, and there's actually a prayer against the heretics, and it's against the slanderers, and it's those who, in the first century, have been those who collaborate with the Roman Empire or the nations that rule over and persecute Israel. So, you're kind of, in bed with the enemy, and obviously Herod was kind of very assimilated. He was, wanting to appease the Jews on one hand and appease Rome on the other hand.
He wants to keep peace because he wants to keep power. I think that's the big thing about Herod that we're going to kind of see throughout this section. Herod is not a very good practicing Jew. He's also not a very good practicing Roman, right? Like, he's somewhere in the middle where he's trying to keep peace with the Romans in order to keep power, and he's trying to keep peace with the Jews in order to stop an uprising from happening. And so he's kind of in this middle ground where he's playing with both sides. You can see that as he marries Herodias and all these other things happen, right? These are power grabs from both Herodias and Herod and everything they're kind of doing there, working against other members of their family in order to succeed. This is one of the reasons why Herod the Great was so paranoid about his power, because he was so worried about his family coming in and killing him and taking his throne and doing these different things. And so his sons are exactly the same here.
And he's trying to do this balancing act, which obviously didn't make the Jewish people too happy and really upset them. And ultimately, that plays the background as to, even with Judas, we want a military Messiah that's going to free us from these compromised kings and from this Gentile Roman influence that's polluting our land with idols and paganism and laws that are not God's laws.
Yeah, we've talked about this a ton on the channel, but the fact that the Jewish people during the day thought that Jesus was going to be, the Messiah was going to be a conquering king that was going to come riding in on a horse and destroy everybody, that's a pretty major thing, right? And so for the Jews to be wrong about that, it's going to cloud their vision entirely. You've seen it happen on this channel, right? Whenever I have an idea of what is supposed to happen scripturally, or what is supposed to happen, what I think is supposed to happen in the Chosen coming up, I have really bad theories when that comes to play, right? But when I encounter things with an open mind and I see what the truth of the situation is, or what the storyline is playing out to be, then I'm way more accurate in my theories and my guessing for the Chosen overall. Hey, real quick, do you enjoy our videos like this, where we talk about the future of the Chosen and talking about what's upcoming in the Chosen season 5, 6, and 7 and beyond? Then we're going to continue making videos like this, but oftentimes we're going to need your help. There are up seasons and down seasons to this whole YouTube thing. Whenever the new season of The Chosen comes out, it's very, very great for us. We can make a lot of videos and you guys love it. However, when there's not a lot of information coming out, it's pretty hard for us to continue making videos like this. So if you want to support us even through those times, the best way to do so is through our Patreon, snipesupport.com. You can just click that link in the description down below, and it would really help us out. $5, $10, or $25 a month every month is really helpful to us, and you can cancel at any time. So if you want to join Patreon, the link is down in the description down below, and we'd love your help with that. Anyway, let's get back to the video.
And Herod would have claimed, no, I'm a good Jew. I'm practicing. I'm just pragmatic. I mean, did he even defend himself, or was he just just completely heretical. And
Well, Herod the Great, he comes from a Semitic family, Idumean
We're forced to
background.
convert into Judaism.
Yeah. So, but for somebody as a client king, somebody ruling on behalf of Rome, trying to keep the peace, and in Rome's methodology, right? They said, well, let's give them the kind of ruler that at least understands the Jewish life, and maybe that will help keep the peace.
Yeah, so the Romans are making Herod the Great king originally because they wanted to keep the peace on the Jewish side, but also have someone that they could control, right? So there's two sides of it for them as well, where they needed a king that they could control, but also someone who could make sure that there wasn't going to be this big uprising by just placing a Roman in control of the area.
And peacekeeping was really important to Rome. They didn't like these dust-ups
Right,
of
and,
riots.
and that's the thing that we talk about throughout the seasons is there's this an idea that Rome just went around killing people. They did sometimes, but it wasn't. They didn't want that. They wanted peace. Right. Pilate wants peace, especially because he's been rebuked in the past for being overcorrective. It wasn't. Rome was not always just bloodthirsty.
Right.
They were. It's not so much that they wanted peace in terms of shalom. They wanted order.
Yeah, well, that's probably
they wanted business routes to stay open. They didn't. They had other things to do with their military.
They wanted revenue to come through from all these places, right? To fund their military, to have the biggest empire. All of that kind of went back to they want things to be standard so that they continue making money, so they continue growing what they have, basically.
They didn't want to have to develop military resources, and these sort of puppet kings were a way to. They could show up and do the mall ribbon cutting ceremonies and the equivalent and kind of be a figurehead there, but their job was to keep order.
Yeah. So John the Baptist goes to this king.
Herod Antipas says you shouldn't be marrying like this. This is not how it's done, especially if you want to be in accordance with God's law here in the land of the Lord. And that really offended Herodias, the new bride, more than it appeared to affect Herod Antipas.
Yeah, we mentioned that Chusa, who is a biblical figure working in Herod's court, says, he finds John the Baptist interesting. He finds him amusing, and we've seen that from historical tradition and biblical tradition that it didn't seem to bother Herod as much as it did Herodias.
Yeah, that's what we see from Scripture is that John basically was interesting to Herod, and so that's why he kept him around. That's why he didn't kill him to begin with. He didn't really have too much of a problem with him, but Herodias, of course, had a major problem with him as she was the one that he's calling out for leaving one brother and then going to be with another. That's obviously an incestual sort of idea there.
Yeah, clearly she wasn't too thrilled with it.
That's right.
And arranged this whole thing. So John the Baptist, and we try to see this story through Joanna's eyes, who is accurate biblically that she was married to Chusa, and so would have had access to this. So the dance and all.
Yeah, I don't think it would be exactly like we see it in The Chosen, though. I think it's a very simplified version. I think Chusa would have been one of the many people that was next to Herod, not necessarily Herod's right-hand man, like we kind of see in The Chosen, because anytime we see Herod is when we see Chusa generally, and so we see him being the only other couple, him and Joanna, that are there other than Pilate and Claudia. So this kind of doesn't really make sense for me in terms of what we should see. I think we should see a lot more people within the court of Herod, because that's what Chusa was a part of. He was part of Herod's administration, not necessarily his right-hand man, if that makes sense.
All of that. I mean, this is how do we do there? It's one of my favorite, at least visual scenes, because we portray this big banquet, and we filmed it in Utah, and it was outdoors. It was just a really cool opportunity. But even the intro of that scene, some of the partying and whatnot, is that how those banquets would have gone? It was we had animals, we had dancing, it felt like not very modest.
No, and that would be again someone like John the Baptist or the Jewish people's concern about that, right? It was immodest. It was not in accord with what you would expect from someone who was following the Torah and the commandments. So it would have been something that was offensive.
Now, if we were a show that was going to push the envelope a little bit and maybe have a higher rating from PG-13 or R, would that banquet have been gone even further? I mean, how are we talking Caligula here? Are we talking? It would have been maybe a more measured version of it, but in terms of the dance, it seems like it's clear that there had to be some sort of sensuality happening to get him that worked up. But
for sure, I mean, in Scripture, there's definitely this undertone of like, this was such a great dance. This is such a sensual dance that he wanted to give her as much as he possibly could, up to half of his kingdom, right? And so this is, of course, I think is hyperbole on the part of Herod, but also he wanted to give her something big, which is why he didn't refuse her whenever she asked for the head of John the Baptist on a platter, right? That's what she wanted because that's what her mother told her to ask for, but she could have asked for a lot more, right? She could have asked for a lot of different things because of this, and this even leans into like, what did he want to sleep with her? Did he sleep with her? I mean, it's not his daughter technically, but it is his niece. It's like super strange stuff here.
But we wanted to try to give a little bit of it without obviously being too unfamily friendly.
Yeah, I appreciated the family friendly nature of the dance. It probably would have been a little more provocative in reality, but yeah.
And the party itself, I mean, was Herod just completely off the rails? I mean, it seems like it.
Yeah, I don't. Well, of course, you know, if Caligula is your standard, I don't think Herod Antipas would measure up to that. That's right. But yeah,
we don't have pictures from the party.
No.
But
I wasn't invited, so I couldn't.
Yeah. But overall, just the last part of that scene with the beheading and all of that, how much of that stood out to you as plausible? Was there anything that historically seemed a stretch?
Maybe the biggest stretch is, according to the Gospel of Mark, when Herod makes his, hyperbolic promise, ask anything you want and I'll give it to you, up to half my kingdom, which is hyperbole. It wasn't literally going to give her the keys to half of his kingdom. The Gospel of Mark suggests that the dancer had to go ask her mom first and then came back.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I remember that now. Yeah.
So the way you filmed it, it kind of telescoped that together, and
it's already taken place. She's told her, when it comes time,
this is what you ask.
This is what you ask.
Yeah. So they just kind of truncated that to make it so that it wasn't taking as much screen time there. Yeah.
And then, of course, for the drama of the show, she whispers it in his ear. So for most of us, it's not a surprise what she's asking for, but for people that aren't expecting it.
The only thing about that, though, was a part of the reason that in the scriptures, I think Herod had to fulfill that promise is because in the scriptures she speaks it out loud, and it would in front of all of his guests. So, and we kind of all assume
there would be a shame issue.
There'd be a shame issue if he didn't follow through it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So he's saying basically, if she were to proclaim this thing that she wants out loud in front of everybody, you've just heard King Herod say, you can have whatever you want up to half the kingdom. So then if he did not grant her wish, there would have been a shame that was upon him because he did not grant the wish, and his word would have been basically broken there, right? He didn't continue to fulfill what he promised that he would for her. And so, that makes a lot of sense there too.
In that regard.
Sure.
Yeah, and what it brought back to me was, because I'm all about connecting the old and the new, it brought back to me a connection back to the story of Esther, where Vashti is invited to come and dance before or present herself before the king, and she doesn't want to. It's kind of the opposite, and even the lavishness of the banquet and all of that, it kind of has some, even up to half the kingdom.
Yeah,
right.
That promise is given there in Esther.
Right. So it's kind of reminiscent of kind of this flashback to kind of contrasting with the book of Esther. One thing I did love about it was when Yeshua, Jesus, prophetically rips his garments, which when a Jewish person hears about a death or going to a funeral, you traditionally rip a garment. It's symbolic that that person has been ripped away from you. I thought that was very powerful, how you intertwine their lives and how he prophetically does that act.
Right, yeah. And we weren't going to show the literal beheading, and so we illustrated it through the ripping of the garment. It was.
What if they had? That would have been so dark. Would have been very intense for sure.
My co-writer Tyler's idea to connect the lamb as John the Baptist. There's a lot of visual imagery near the end.
That's beautiful.
And when he says, "This is for a wedding banquet," and John says, "I've never been to a wedding banquet, but I'm about to go to one."
Yeah.
Of course, hearkening to the ultimate wedding banquet
In Revelation.
in the book of Revelation, right?
Yeah.
And I love that he saw the rising sun.
Yeah.
And it goes back to the Benedictus, the dawn from on high shall rise upon us. And so it's kind of that he's dying, but the dawn is there, the dawn of the coming of the Savior.
Absolutely.
It really plays nicely.
Yeah, interesting stuff for sure. Yeah, I think at the end of John's life, the whole understanding of him decreasing so that Christ can increase is the core of that message, right? And seeing the Lamb there, obviously, at the very end.
To a line in the Gospel of John that's credited to John the Baptist, right? He must increase and I must decrease.
There it is, yeah.
And so even as he lowers his head, decreasing his own stature to ultimately lose his head with the swinging of the axe, he is quite satisfied with, yep, I must decrease while Jesus increases. So yeah, I appreciated the art of this episode. And
Yeah, and at the end of the episode, we are celebrating three things all at once. Maybe not celebrating, but at least.
Yeah, we'll get into that section another time, maybe. If you want to check out the whole episode of the deep dive into the Bible roundtables and all that kind of stuff, you can check it out on the Chosen app. We'll dig into a piece of these kind of things every week as we jump through all the episodes here. I think there's some really interesting things. Next episode, we'll talk about Peter being the rock. Is it Peter being the rock? Is it the declaration that he made being the rock? Is it Jesus being the rock? What is the rock? We'll talk about that next week, so stick around for that, and let me know what you think in the comments down below.